Hello, 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 everybody. I'm Grant Faulkner, Executive Director of NaNoWriMo, and thank you to our very special webcast today with renowned founder of NaNoWriMo, Chris Baty. And Chris is many, many things. He's a raconteur. He is a wordsmith, a word slinger, a published author. He's a parent. He's a teacher. He's a lover of hats, which includes Viking helmets, by the way. He's a wizard of creativity, and he is the official world record holder of the most NaNoWriMo's ever, as one would think, as founder. Welcome, Chris.
It's so good to be here, Grant. Hi, everybody. How are you?
Yeah, hello, and thank you. You know, we were talking beforehand that we were going to ask everybody to put where you are coming from in the chat, but I see that everybody's doing that already, and it's so nice to see that we've got a global audience, Chris.
Scotland. We saw San Antonio. I saw in Oakland. Hello, Oakland.
Yeah, we're actually in Berkeley and Oakland. Chris is in Alameda, I think.
I am, yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. As I said, everybody, thank you for enjoying or joining us. And Chris, I just read your original email that went out in 1999, and I was like reading it as a friend who could have received this zany email out of the blue. And I just wanted, you know, I was trying to inhabit that person who received it. And I'm just going to read a little bit of it because I'm very charmed by it for numerous reasons. And I think that this will be a good way to welcome everybody into this year's NaNoWriMo, actually. You said, this is an excerpt, hear ye, come one, come all, and dust off those word processing devices. Under the motto, a lousy novel is better than no novel at all. Have to agree with that. I have declared July National Novel Writing Month. To celebrate, I want to write a novel in a month, and I want you to write one too. Everybody's got a ton of stories in them. Collectively, we have lived over 700 years, and in that time, we've accumulated enough characters, places, and plot twists to fill a dozen tomes. I am proposing that we seize art by the horns and spill some of those experiences onto the page. And here we are 25 years later, after that email was sent. I'm just curious. Do you think this was going to be a 25-year thing?
No, God, no, Grant, no. I mean, I think you can hear a little bit in that email, my desperation to make this feel like some vaunted, esteemed, time-honored thing already, just out of pure desperation of feeling like this endeavor was doomed to fail from the get-go. I really felt like this was going to be one of those things that we would try, we would fail at dramatically and very quickly, and then we would turn our backs on it and never speak of it again. And I think that there was something about I think the wonder of combining a group of friends with this deadline, and then having this kind of like beautiful artistic goal, which I think for me at the time, I was 26, I was living in Oakland, as some of our guests do. And I was kind of in that, so I think 26 without kids, with a group of friends that are kind of like family. And I think a lot of people have that experience in their 20s where you have this really close group of friends and you go on trips together. You know, we had just gone to my first ever Burning Man together. Like we had a lot of spare time. I was living in this really kind of rundown, but also wonderful apartment in Oakland at 77 Vernon Street, where a couple of my friends also lived. And so I think there was just something about that moment that was like the golden age of bad ideas, right? And so people were very eager and ready to take on this idea of like, yeah, maybe we should write a novel in a month. Maybe that makes sense. But yeah, you can tell from this email, I was already just being like, okay, yeah, let's, this is gonna be fun, right? Here we go.
I love that spirit of over-promising from the beginning. Like National Novel Writing Month. I actually didn't know that you called it that from the beginning, which I think is brilliant.
I know. I think there's a weird hyphen in the email where I was still trying to figure out how to, like, should this be a hyphenated term or something? But yeah, I mean, that first year was interesting because the part that you didn't get to was the definition of what a novel was, which that first year it was super loose, right? We let people do graphic novels using some equivalency. I don't know if it was a picture was worth 1,000 words or something. We had people doing screenplays. People were tackling a bunch of different projects. But for people who are doing fiction writing, the goal was 175 pages. Mm-hmm. And so this was before I had realized that different people define page differently, and that if you, depending on what your margins were, you could get to 175 pages very easily.
Yeah, you're right.
I somehow thought of like a book page. That must be a scientific unit of measurement. And it turns out, no, it was not. And as we got closer to the end of the month, I think our definition of page got looser and looser. And so it wasn't until the next year that I was like, okay, we should probably come up with something that feels a little more concrete. And that's where that 50,000 word goal came in.
You know what? A question just occurred to me. I have never asked you when and how the acronym NaNoWriMo came about, because you didn't use that in the initial email here.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it started that first year, probably after we had incorporated and decided we were going to do this. I think it's just because National Novel Writing Month is a mouthful, right?
It's a mouthful. I can never quite say it.
A mouthful. But then I feel like it also then opened the door to this perennial question of is it NaNoWriMo or NaNoWriMo, which is, it's a helpful,
it's still being discussed, to tell you the truth.
It's good.
It's being discussed around the world as we speak right now. I've been involved in some of those discussions. You know what? I forgot to tell our viewers exactly what's going to happen during the webcast. Chris and I are going to indulge in some of the lore of NaNoWriMo and hear some of those really interesting beginning stories, because this will be NaNoWriMo number 25 this November, which is just wild. And then we're going to talk a little bit about our 25th anniversary campaign, which we just kicked off a couple weeks ago. And then we're going to talk about novel writing. And Chris is going to share some secrets that I don't know. I don't know if he's told anybody these secrets of novel writing, but we're going to find out. And then we're going to open up things to your questions, because we want to answer as many of those as possible. Well, I'm always charmed by how you said you founded NaNoWriMo accidentally. And I read in No Plot, No Problem that you say that you and your friends didn't really know what you were doing when you started writing. And so I'm curious just about like not knowing what you're doing when writing a novel can actually be a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that was like the secret to our success, right? So I never studied writing. When I went to college, I studied cultural anthropology, and that was kind of like, I just loved people and this notion of like deep ethnography and, spending time understanding lifeways and culture. And I tried to take one creative writing class in college, and I just couldn't get in because I was not an English major. And I was just like, wah, wah. But I'd always really loved writing. I loved reading. But I think because I hadn't taken those classes that had done a more kind of a official approach to kind of like understanding what was a feasible amount of writing work to accomplish in a short amount of time, or how to, kind of really think deeply about the mechanics of story and plot and characters, I think I gave myself permission to just wing it. And I think the other bit that was so important was just giving everybody, including myself, permission to be terrible at it. And I think that as adults, when we go into something with really high expectations, which I think is, as adults, that's like our number one skill, right? It's like bringing way too high of expectations, bringing a crippling amount of just like, I don't know, that feeling that if we're not great at it right out of the gate, we should probably forget about it. I think this notion that this was going to suck. Our books were going to be bad. They were going to be bad books, but they would be finished books, right? There would be a beginning and a middle and an end. And I think that ended up unlocking just this a wonderful thing for us, which was this sense of sticking with it, seeing it through. And I think that, from reading Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird, I knew this notion that the power of a bad first draft, right? The first draft, I think Anne Lamott calls the down draft, right? You just get it down. And then the second and third and fourth drafts, those are the up drafts. You polish them up. But I think there's something about novels in particular, they're just such exquisite beasts, right? And there's so many ways to get lost in them when you're creating them. And there's so many ways you could take a story and so many tangents you could follow. And that's part of the wonder of them, right? Is they're almost these infinite worlds, and there's no clear path through them when you're writing one. But I think because of that, it's easy to start feeling like you need to optimize and know every turn, and you need to understand where you're going, and you need to bring in this overarching sense of story structure. And is this a 3-act structure? Is this a 4-act structure? And we didn't know the terms 3-act structure or 4-act structure or anything.
Thank God.
Really what we knew is we knew how to get coffee in great quantities in the Bay Area. And we knew how to keep each other kind of company and accountable. And there was kind of that first year, it was funny. So 1999 was a really funny year for Bay Area technology. So this was, if you think back to 99, this was like before people really had cell phones. So the idea of portable technology, you were like had a Discman, maybe you were bringing it around with you, right? And the laptops tended to be big and heavy, and the battery life tended to be very short. So you didn't see a ton of people, unless you could find a place to plug in, you weren't seeing like these worlds of people out in laptops, with laptops out in public. And so I think in knowing we wanted to keep each other company and also make it feel kind of special, we started bringing our laptops to places like coffee shops and bars. We went to the IKEA cafeteria once. This notion of like making it a special like noveling outing, I think helped, especially when like the writing started to be bad, which it will be bad at various points, maybe many points. I think that kind of like being like, yes, but at least we have muffins. Like that felt exciting. And there's like the world outside. And so I think one of the things that we didn't know is that really writing, especially novel writing, I think was historically seen as a real solitary endeavor. It was something that you did by yourself for long periods of time. And I do think novel revision is still that for me. Like I enjoy that time, solitary time, but I think in that kind of explosive, anything goes, still figuring it out, very much the downdraft kind of moment, I think as much as you can have that sense of solidarity and in community, I think that is really key in getting us through these kind of creative struggles that we're always going to have with any big undertaking.
What I love about that is that as you accidentally founded the NaNoWriMo, all of those things you did that first year, that is the core, the heartbeat of everything we do now. We haven't even really strayed from it. It is community, company, accountability, coffee, and not necessarily knowing how to write a novel, because the best way to learn to write a novel is just to do it. I think that's like a really valuable lesson.
Yeah. Well, there's also this weird thing that something about that page count and then later the word count helped with. Like that also, you think of this like creative writing, creative pursuits, art as this kind of a very kind of right-brained thing, right? But I think bringing in a little bit of that left-brain sense of like quantification to me was really, really helpful in, again, releasing that inner critic that I think we all kind of bring with us. Because I think writing the first draft of a novel in a month feels impossible and daunting and makes me want to die a little bit inside. But writing 1,667 words a day, that feels doable. And I can really understand, like, at the end of the day, did I do that? Yep, I can tell. And I can break that 1,667 down into little smaller bite-sized pieces. I can maybe do 3 600-word writing sessions. There's something about that I think like marathon runners also kind of think about. It's like the math of the undertaking really becomes key to the way you perceive it. But I think better than that, it helps you define success in the context of progress, making specific bits of progress. And that's how it's that kind of little bite of the elephant each time that like gets you through it. And so there's something that's kind of funny about making novel writing a numbers game that I think is actually incredibly helpful for me, like at all points, like also in revision, I break it down into, chapters, and then I have the chapters and sub-chapters on Post-it notes on the wall. And just thinking about it as something that I can visualize and move through. So it doesn't quite feel like this just, morass of different possible problems and unresolvable solutions. Like, I just really love this idea of making it much more quantifiable as to like, are we making progress and measuring that as you go. And then you can celebrate each one too. I think that's helpful. Like, I'm a really big believer in the power of treats. I think everybody who's writing a novel deserves treats. I think before you start this NaNoWriMo, if you haven't built out your like treat calendar, that's important. I think you reward yourself frequently, constantly. Nobody else is going to do it for you. You have to be your own treat giver. That's another motto.
I like this. I like the muffin reference too. And IKEA, I'm going to go there for that muffin. Well, I'm going to get back because I am intrigued on the trajectory of NaNoWriMo's growth as an organization, or as not as an organization, because in those early years it wasn't. So after 1999, you had 21 people total there. What happened after that?
Yeah. So I think I left that first year feeling really excited because I was like, if I can do this, if my friends can do this, anybody can do this. And everybody should be doing this. Like, it just felt good. And again, that first year, the vast majority of the people who were taking part were not writers. They were administrative assistants, they were teachers, they were students, they were designers. They were like, people that, again, like, I think loved reading, never thought they would actually write a book. And so I think when so many of us came out of it being like, oh my God, there was a book in me I didn't realize was there, that, like, what else is in there? I think that was the start of this thing for me of being like, I want to bring this back again next year. And So the second year is when I had a friend named Patrick who made an actual like a website. The first year's website was built using Microsoft Word's export as HTML function. It was not a thing of beauty. I think it was hosted at like jps.net/tilde/cbaty/ user bin /19775. So I got NaNoWriMo.com and we put up the domain there, and the site looked real, but it was also kind of the start. Like that next year, we ended up having 140 people. So it was like friends of friends. It was well outside of the Bay Area at that point. And that I was like, good, we have hit our peak. We had 140 human beings taking part in this challenge. I can retire now. I know, you know,
bigger than most MFA programs, probably.
Exactly. And then the third year was really like when all hell broke loose. And that was the year that we put up the call. And again, this was like probably still many years before Facebook. This was like before like social media. So most of the people that were finding out about this through word of mouth, where it was like via emails, or this was also like the era of like Diaryland. It was kind of these microblogging platforms, LiveJournal. Early on, we're kind of starting to spread the word about, hey, there's this thing, you can write a novel in a month. And people came to that website that again looked real, and saw kind of tips that I'd asked previous years participants to write up that again seemed legitimate. And then they saw this name, National Novel Writing Month. And I think just at that point, everybody that didn't know me gave this way more like importance than it probably should have. Like, I think people were like, this is clearly like a federal program. Like you can't just call something national anything, right?
Yeah,
like,
that's against the law.
Yeah. Little did they know, anybody can call anything. And so I think that kind of helped build, like, people were like, okay, they're ready to sign up. Unfortunately, on the technical end, all signups were still processed manually. So people would email me. I would hand alphabetize their name on the HTML page. I would hand send them the welcome invite. I would hand send them a separate email invitation to join the Yahoo Club, because that was where our conversations were happening at that point. So that group that was kind of part of that first year, living in the apartment building, traveling to Burning Man in Baja, they were all heroic and like leaning in and like helping out with these like basically around the clock processing marches where we were like drinking Red Bull, trying to get people signed up. And that year was like both wonderful and terrible. It was wonderful in that like I just watched this idea spread. And I think if you've ever been like part of anything that went viral, it's wild, right? Where you're just like, wow, this is like the idea has escaped from the lab. Like I have no control over this. People in South Africa are making NaNoWriMo merchandise right now. Like it's like, what do I do with this? And people are wanting to have write-ins and get together. And that was the start where I was like, oh my gosh, there were already local volunteers. Now we have this amazing group of volunteers called municipal liaisons who organize write-ins. And that was the first year really where that organically emerged, where people in Austin, Texas were like, we're going to have a get together in a bar and we're going to all go write, or we're going to, in Baltimore, we're going to go to a library. And that was amazing and so inspiring. But I think it was also that year was the first one where I was like, oh, in previous years, you would send me your word count at 3 points and I would build a progress bar for you and then put a star in it. I was like, we can't do that. So we're going to go on the honor system. You just input your own word count. And then if it's past, 50,000, then you will declare yourself a winner. And people were like outraged. Like they were like, no, there needs to be some measuring, like there needs to be some external validation or account of this. And so I think that was the first year when I realized like, okay, to make this real and to survive this number of people and build this foundation that can support them, which I really wanted to do, we just need to start investing in this. And that meant investing in like the technical infrastructure. It meant like getting an actual business license and starting to think of this as like, yeah, what is this, the corporate structure for this? And then also just starting to have some of those like uncomfortable conversations where it's like, okay, everybody in the world probably shouldn't be able to make National Novel Writing Month merchandise and sell it. But then I felt terrible being like, oh, this like classroom, in New York has made these adorable shirts. And now really I'm going to be the man who comes down and is like, you need to take these down. But so I think that idea of like controlling the brand became like the first thing. And I was like, what is this brand? Like, but I think that becomes like, as everything grows, you do want people to start to understand and trust like what's happening and where it's coming from. And so it was a crash course in like so many things, but that I think was like year 3 when we went from 140 to 5,000 was really the year of like the start of the modern National Novel Writing Month, which immediately also was like woefully inaccurate. Like NaNoWriMo International Novel Writing Month just doesn't roll off the tongue, but that's really what it should be called, right? Because it's like, we had very quickly, we had, writers on all continents. We had like Antarctica, like people in Antarctica doing it. Like that was another one of the absolutely amazing, wonderful things. It's just, I don't know, just watching this idea and the community and the encouragement kind of spread and grow. And I think that spirit of like, hey, none of us really know what we're doing, but we're gonna have a great time figuring it out together. Like that ethos just really suffused everything. And I don't know, that was pretty magical. And I think that's continued, like very improbably.
Totally.
I think online communities have a tendency to like start really encouraging and really supportive. And I think it's very easy for them to kind of like tip into something else where you start to have people who are mean, or people who, have a sense of superiority or whatever it is. I think, again, part of this, the notion of NaNoWriMo as a business is just trying to figure out, we have amazing forums moderators, right? And like making sure that we're making enough money to be able to pay those people to spend the countless hours that they spend in the forums, just helping make sure that everything stays positive, that questions gets answered, that things that are posted in one place that should be in another get moved. That's like a tireless, thankless job. And it really takes like, you can, I think, have like a big group of people that are taking part in an event, as long as you have those people that are also out there helping answer questions and direct people and kind of put down fires as they bust out. And I think National Novel Writing from the get-go and still to this day just has a wonderful, wonderful group of moderators. But that's something we can't take for granted, because I think the culture of the event really hinges on that idea of this being that warm, welcoming, supportive place for everybody.
Absolutely. Everything you said, it's just endlessly intriguing to me how those early days apply to us now in terms of both challenges and opportunities and wonderfulness and the magic of it all. And so I'm curious, because you're talking right now about how it went from a very casual event to more and more formal, and there are more and more things you had to think about as like the actual leader of this all. And so NaNoWriMo became a nonprofit in 2006. And by then, I'm not sure when, somewhere around then, you hired your first employee, the Young Writers Program started. You had to be thinking very officially, like, this is an organization, and this is an organization where we actually have to file taxes, actually, after you.
Yeah, you get audited every year. You have to hire an auditor. We had a bookkeeper and all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think so. But by 2005, really, it was clear that National Novel Writing Month was like larger than I ever dreamed it would be. And I loved it, like loved it. But I knew that eventually there would be a time when I was ready to go do something else. And I had no interest in selling National Novel Writing Month. I didn't want to, reach out to Barnes & Noble, or like Borders Books probably would have been the Leviathan in the room at that point, and turn it into like a money-making corporation. The spirit of it, I think, just always felt much more valuable than I think what a corporation would end up bringing. And so I think, to me, the idea of turning it into a 501c3 nonprofit, which if you're outside the United States is basically just a nonprofit charity that has a lot of regulations and rules, and you put together a board of directors, and the executive director, who now wonderfully capably has been Grant for almost a decade. Is that right, Grant? Is that
almost 12 years?
12 years. Come on.
Yeah.
See,
crazy.
math.
Yeah.
Right. So I think, you serve at the behest of the board. There's a lot of, checks and balances in it. But to me, that is also, if you believe in something, that's the way to keep it going, right? It means that there will always be a group of people there to maintain it, to take care of it, to pass the torch on. And I knew that eventually that would be the case, that I would be ready to do something. But I just wanted the organization to continue. And so, I remember when we first hired Tavia Stewart, the first employee, and just being like, oh, wow, like this is, I think all along it had kind of felt like, oh, this is this really fun inside joke that now just keeps growing. And like, we're all, it's real now, ha, ha, ha. And then I was like, oh, wow, there's somebody who's like, health insurance depends on this organization now. And this is, and also for me, like I had been a freelance writer, and I stopped taking freelance writing work because I just wanted to do National Novel Writing Month, which meant NaNoWriMo was my only income and my health insurance as well. We ended up getting an office in the Uptown neighborhood in Oakland. And all of that stuff. Yeah, I think that notion of like really becoming real and having regular board meetings and being like, oh God, okay, what do we do? Is there like, one of the truly official things that we started at board meetings was that all board members needed to have a Viking helmet with their name on it. And so then when we'd have votes, you had to put on a Viking helmet.
Brilliant.
which I think is in the state of California.
I think it's in the,
Secretary of State's bylaws.
legally required, definitely.
But yeah, but I think like, I guess one of the lessons, I think NaNoWriMo's first lesson for me was that I think all of us have a book in us, right? And I think that everybody has stories that are kind of flowing through us as humans. And that the process, I think, of getting one down on paper, just, it feels amazing, right? It's also a struggle and makes me want to bash my head against the wall sometimes. But like, I don't know, at the end of the day, it's just living in these worlds of stories that are within us just feels great. But I think NaNoWriMo's second lesson was not about a book. It was about this idea that all of us just have the power to build these things, right? Like, I didn't know how to run a business. I definitely didn't know how to run a 501c3 nonprofit, but I think when you care about something and when you follow your curiosity, it leads to like wonderful places, and we can all figure this stuff out along as we go. I think also just in each step of this journey, there has always been a group of people who have been there, who know this stuff, who can kind of help advise on like moving it up to the next level and helping make it real.
Well, on that note, so I'm sure that throughout all this growth that you were experiencing and making it a nonprofit, I'm sure that you were buoyed by some lavish funding from the U.S. government and by really wealthy tech entrepreneurs. I'm just assuming there was a lot of money coming in to support this. Is that right?
Billions. So billions of dollars, exactly. At all times were flowing, which was redirecting into a coffee fund that kind of kept me alive. No, I mean, I think, this was also interesting. Like, I think not having a nonprofit background, I think like the model that I had seen being like a music lover was like going to shows and bands would sell t-shirts. And so I think from like NaNoWriMo's earliest days, before we were a nonprofit, I was like, well, what if we sold things? And I think that was like also wonderful and horrible, where I think fiction writing to me is a form of magic. I think design and illustration is also a form of magic. And so one of my favorite parts of National Novel Writing Month, and what became, and I think still is, a pretty big part of like a funding, is just we make things, right? We make things to sell, whether those are t-shirts or posters. But I'm terrible at making tough decisions. And then I'm also like easily smitten with anytime a designer makes something, I'm like, that's incredible. And so we would regularly, I remember in 2002, this was a problem where the designer was like, okay, here's 5 different options for the t-shirt design. I was like, I want all of them. I want every one of these. And I want to put them on like 10 different types of t-shirts. Let's do 3/4 sleeves. Let's do kind of tighter ones. And so I think that notion though, as much as it completely turned my apartment into just like one giant sort of t-shirt for many, many, many years, I think that's been kind of this innovative model where along with selling things, we also then just relied then on just people who got something out of the event giving something back. And I think during like my time at National Novel Writing Month, the average donation I think was $12 or something. Like it was, it's not a ton, but I think when you have that many people who are taking part, who do get something out of it and give that $12, that creates this pool of money that can be used to pay for staff time. It can pay for moderators. It can pay for the Young Writers Program as we send out curriculum and stickers and buttons and kits to all of these, 1,000 classrooms around the world. But I think it's a precarious one. And I think about that, like, I know definitely, I would say like, just candidly, some of my hardest moments running National Novel Writing Month came not during November. It came right at the start of December when I looked at our fundraising appeals and I was just like, I have so many dreams about what I want to fix. And a lot of those things are things that participants have raised where they're like, wouldn't it be cool if, or I can't do this one basic thing on the website. We also would routinely have like $60,000 server bills, and it's like, I didn't have any like ancillary form apart from those billions that we were getting from tech entrepreneurs that I'd put into coffee already. We didn't really have a pool. And so I think the kind of scary moments, and this is true for anybody that's running kind of a community focused nonprofit, is just, what do you do if that message doesn't get out, or people that take part? I think everybody who does, one, I just want to say thank you out there to everybody who's ever donated to National Novel Writing Month. There are so many of you, and you are like the lifeblood of this organization. I just think I had so many moments where the community stepped up and that $12 ended up being like a life-changing amount of money for our programs. But I just think there would be times at the end of that cycle in December where we hadn't raised enough money. And I would look also at the number, there would be like, I don't know, thousands and thousands of people who had, won National Novel Writing, who had written a book that they wouldn't have otherwise written, who, made friends they wouldn't have made. The event meant something. It was valuable to them. And then I would send out an appeal basically being like, whatever it was worth to you, give something back, whatever it is. And the number that they picked was like 0. And I think that was the thing that I just struggled with, where I was like, I feel like I'm not communicating this well enough. And I think that as the leader of a nonprofit, it's hard not to take that personally, right? Where you see somebody talking online about how much this program meant to them, but then they're not donating. But I think then I look at myself and I'm like, there's so many organizations that I'm also doing that. Like we get busy, we forget, right? Like I think about public radio, like I care so much about public radio. And I think of myself, I'm an annual donor to like our public radio station. When I look at like my donation history, it's like, oh God, no, I forgot for 4 years. I got busy, I get distracted. I think that's kind of what can happen as well. And so I think it's been a lesson to me to really remember to like lean in and support the organizations that are doing great work. Because I think from firsthand experience that oftentimes those organizations are putting on a brave face. They're kind of wanting to seem invincible, but the line between surviving and folding is oftentimes like terrifyingly slim, especially for a nonprofit that relies on individual donations, small dollar donations. And so the other thing I would just say to everybody and to myself as well is, if you are getting something out of any organization that is a nonprofit, just always remember to give something back. Even the tiniest amount helps.
Thank you for that message, Chris, because NaNoWriMo does have a really unique model in that the people who we serve are also most accountable for most of our funding. So I'll just give it some figures here. 40% of all revenue comes from individual community members, plus 30% of revenue from those T-shirts and mugs that you're talking about. They still sell. We still rely on them. So yeah, we rely on our community, and this, this holds challenges, but also wonderful opportunities, because people do give to us. So they are kind of giving back, not only to themselves, but their fellow writers, by giving, you're helping somebody else write a novel, which I think is just like beautiful, but it does present funding challenges. And that's one reason we're doing the 25th campaign, is that we have a 3-year plan to actually go from a $1.4 or $5 million organization to a $2 million organization. And that's, it's not, we're just not trying to raise a lot of money. We actually need that money to exist as we are now and properly staff our programs and invest in all those things you talked about, like having a website that works well and paying off those server bills and paying for staff that is our program, our main program expense, the staff and those forums moderators that you mentioned, things like that. It's very few people who actually run this global organization and oversee the many discussions of, is it pronounced NaNoWriMo or NaNoWriMo, and should somebody be counting your words when they're submitted at the end, and more. I'm just making a joke, but so anyway, I think Catherine is putting a link to our 25th campaign plan in the chat, so you can take a look at that, and also a link to donate. Per what Chris said, donations are deeply we really need them, and we appreciate them, and we'll make them work for you as a writer, and we'll make them work for our community of writers. So thank you for that, Chris. And I want to jump in. I'm just looking at the time here, and I know you got you got to leave right at 3. So instead of finances and nonprofit management, I want to talk about writing, thing we love more than anything. And I'm so curious. So you've been doing NaNoWriMo more than anybody on this planet. What's your approach to getting ready to write, and has your approach changed over time?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first I need to fact check you, because I'm going to guess that there is somebody out there who has done NaNoWriMo more than me. So I'm going to confess, I did NaNoWriMo by the book for the first 20 years. So I have 20 solid years. So for the past 5 years, though, I have been doing something NaNoWriMo related every fall, but often using it the way a lot of people do, I think, to get progress made on revision or kind of burst through some block that I'm having. So I'm going to guess that there is somebody out there who's done it 21 times or 22 times, and they are the new champion of national knowledge.
All right, I've got to find that person now.
Yeah, but I still look forward to it every year. Like I definitely there's something that's just so nice about, given all of the busyness in our lives, that kind of every fall, where at least in the Northern Hemisphere, there's this sense of the leaves are turning, or there's change afoot. I think in the Southern Hemisphere, it's like the beautiful summer, which is just a terrible burden for our Australia, New Zealand comrades. But yeah, I still really look forward to it. I think my approach that first year, I started without anything. Like, it truly was like no plot, no problem. I didn't have a character. I didn't have a plot, a story, a setting. I kind of just started with a voice, and I just followed that voice. And that level of pantsing, I have like experimented on and off with. But I think now I tend to think, I spend a couple weeks before the event starts, and I often kind of think about, okay, who could this main character be? I like to think about kind of like what's missing from their life. I think all of us are kind of like missing something. And then I kind of think about what they want and then what they need. And I think those are kind of two different things, right? We all kind of also probably want something that is maybe not going to ultimately bring us happiness, but there's some underlying need that will kind of fill that missing hole. And I think for me, those stories where by the end, maybe the character didn't get the thing that they wanted, but they got what they needed, those feel very satisfying. And so I kind of just start teasing some of those threads out and try to figure out, okay, who is this person? What is their world? Who are the people around them? What is their life stage? I think that the age of somebody really determines a lot of kind of how these things are going to work. And so, yeah, I think I'm doing the kind of like planting. What is it? The modified. It's
planting, yeah.
Planting. I think that's kind of who I am as a NaNoWriMo writer now.
Yeah, me too. We did a poll a few years ago. We did a whole thing around pantsing and planting, and I forget the exact percentages, but it was, I don't know, maybe 60% of people considered themselves planters. So
planters, that's amazing.
It's the most popular group.
That's great.
Yeah, I agree. I love the conversation, the creative conversation. Well, I'm curious. I get asked this all the time. Actually, I just got asked it yesterday. Somebody was telling me they had a very good idea for a very commercial novel, but another novel that they just, was more them, I guess. That's one way to put it. And so a lot of people, it actually is very hard to decide what you're going to write and why. And it's a big decision, because I think like what you choose to write really kind of guides your experience a lot, whether you do it just for a month or a year or 5 years. And so what would you tell someone about how to choose a novel idea?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I do think almost everybody's had the experience too of they decide they're going to do NaNoWriMo. They have a sense of what their idea will be. And then usually in like the wee hours before November 1st, some other thing comes up, right? And sometimes that thing is the right.
It's always better.
It's always better. But sometimes also I think as writers, we get scared about committing to something because we're like, ugh, this idea is this really the ultimate expression of everything I've learned in life? And could this contain every insight and bit of wisdom? And so I think one, just remembering to keep those expectations low and know that this novel is going to be an experiment, right? Whatever you end up pursuing, that some parts of it you'll get right, some parts of it you're going to get very wrong, but that getting a beginning and a middle and an end down on paper is the ultimate goal. Because then you can kind of look at it and decide, do I want to invest more in it? If so, you'll know what you want to change and fix to make it better. But I think oftentimes people bring there's a novel that they feel like they should write. And that's the one that they first bring to it. And then there's a novel that they really want to write. And that is a different book. And that one may not have much commercial potential. It may be kind of weird. But I think always trying to think about the novel that will kind of light you up, the novel that just would make you excited to come to your keyboard. Anytime you have a sense of obligation to a book before you started writing it, that still could be the book for you. But I think listen to your heart on this a little bit. Like, what is the one that gives you a little bit of, I don't know, kind of little fireworks in your brain that you're like, ooh, I'm scared, but I'm excited. I think following that, like that kind of mix of fear and joy, I think is like it's a good barometer.
Yeah, that's a good, good indicators there. Fear and joy. Yeah. And no shoulds. Well, you're a busy person. You're working a demanding job. You're a parent. You're a writer. I think one of the biggest people ask me like what's your one key to NaNoWriMo success? And I think other than choosing that novel that brings out feelings of fear and joy, I always actually say time management.
Yeah, say more. I want to hear your time management tips, Grant.
Well, my time management tip is very basic. I mean, I think a lot of people start NaNoWriMo without thinking that they need to open up like 2 hours a day to write 1,700 words. You know, I think you just kind of unconsciously show up. And this is what I did the first year. And then that 2 hours wasn't really happening to me every day because I was living my life exactly like I did in October and in September. And so I think what I told myself was that I needed a strategy to open up that time. And I follow actually what you wrote about in No Plot, No Problem, is to go on a time hunt and to actually figure out, well, how do I use my time in a day? Because most of us actually don't know. But if you quantify that, then you can identify what you can give up for a month, or like pockets of times, like when you mentioned writing 600 words in 3 different intervals throughout the day, like maybe you write at your lunch break, maybe you write for a half hour when you first wake up, maybe you do a lot of power writing on the weekend to catch up and get ahead. So those are just some things.
Yeah, I love all that. Yeah, I mean, it was funny when I was part of the day-to-day life of the organization, I felt I had this wonderful sense that I had to do it, which I think was like the most powerful commitment device ever, right? Because I would all my life, and you do this now, is like I was telling people, you can be busy and still write a novel in a month. It's possible. And so there was no room for me to be like, I got too busy, so I didn't write a novel, you know? And I think I love that because there's so many very good reasons to give up on a book. And I'm so glad that I wasn't able to access those and really just had to finish every year. But the first year after I passed the baton to you and the board and the staff, I realized, I was like, whoa, this is really hard. Like when suddenly nobody cared about my progress, you know, the spotlights were gone. And I was like, who came up with this 1,667 words a day? This is a nightmare. Like,
it's tough.
It's relentless. It's like a wave where I just feel like you fall behind a little bit and then you get smacked by the next day's word count goals. And then you fall behind further and then you're underwater and then the salt water is coming into your sinuses. And I mean, none of it was pleasant. And I think it made me realize like, wow, this is one, a heroic feat for people who do it. And 2, it requires planning. Like you said, I think that you need to come into it already thinking about your schedule. I think if you're a parent, it's particularly important, right? Because there are little beings that kind of depend on you who want your attention. And so I think pre-planning, if you have a partner in your life, I think working out whatever deals you can to have like the extra free writing time, either in the evenings or on the weekends, I think is key. If you're a single parent, that it's really hard. And I think that's where I would really encourage single parents to remember you do so much for your kid and you also deserve to have time for yourself. And that is why letting your child watch an unholy amount of television or spend time on the iPad, everybody wins, right? Like I think for one month, it will not rot their brains. Think of it as them immersing themselves in the power of stories, right? Paw Patrol is a story that kind of has story mechanics and elements, just like anything else. But I do think like just trying to give yourself the gift of that time. And it's something that as adults, we're not good at. We're not good at giving ourselves creative time because there's so many other important things that people are asking of us. And we tend to prioritize the things that other people need from us. So I think one of the things I really encourage people to see as November is going to be your time as much as you can make that happen. And I think also all of us we're just more creative at certain times of day than others. And for me, that strangely, I used to be a night owl and now I'm like all about the morning. And so I really love getting up just really, really early. So I will get up at 5 a.m. before work. I will make a giant pot of coffee. I will consume all of it. And that's when I just feel like I get my best ideas. And I know that not all of us can spend, the bulk of our day in this I call it our greenhouse where like things really flourish. But even if you can get 20 minutes in that time, that you will get so much more done than you would if you were to give yourself an hour outside of that. So I think trying to prioritize, like, are you somebody who works best in the afternoon, in the evening, in early morning, and figuring out how to put as much of your NaNoWriMo into that zone as possible is really great.
That's really good advice. I love that advice of just if you only have 20 minutes of time in the greenhouse of your creativity. Wonderful metaphor, by the way. Just keeping that momentum is so important, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's the other kind of wild thing. And this is like the big advice I would give to somebody doing it for the first time is just to know that like momentum is the key, right? In that when you start writing regularly, you're close to these characters in this world, and you're able to kind of like see paths that I think sometimes when we take off a couple days of writing, it's almost like that world seals over with this film, and it takes like some like got to get in there and like pry it back open to get to the good stuff again. So I do think that like a lot of times when I have felt the most hopeless about my book and just most wanted to give up, the thing I tell myself now is you can give up, but first you have to write 500 words. Sit down, write 500 words, and then you can make the decision on giving up. And every single time after writing 500 words, I have pride that film is off and I'm back in it. And I'm like, okay, this isn't irredeemable. And then you keep writing. And so I think this is something that people who have done National Novel Writing Month for a bunch of years know. But like, I think the difference between like hopelessness and like optimism is often just a very short writing session of like getting those wheels turning again.
I love that technique. And once again, I love your metaphor of like tearing off this encrusted.
Yes. What is that stuff? It's
calcified
so
novel.
Yeah. We need to keep our novels in like Tupperware, something airtight, so we can just pull it open easily.
Yeah. Well, I got one more question, and then I want to go to our viewers' questions here. But one thing I'm just curious about, especially, I think one definition of being a writer is to be filled with self-doubt. There's just something about the act of writing that attracts self-doubt. And so I'm just curious, like you're a seasoned writer at this point. Do you still have pangs of self-doubt? Do you have an inner critic that's like yelling in your ear at times?
All the time. Yeah, it's so I think for me, the challenge, NaNoWriMo has given me permission to write a terrible but promising first draft. And that, so I don't find the first draft to be my problem anymore. But for me, that inner critic comes back hard at revision. And so I now have like finished I'm always revising a NaNoWriMo novel. I've been revising this current NaNoWriMo novel for about 10 years now, which is so wild. But I've, have finished a couple other ones, and, one had an agent for it and sent it out and nobody wanted to buy it, which I think in retrospect, I'm grateful that nobody bought it because I don't think it was quite ready. I was done with it, but it wasn't done. But I do think that like, that relentless sense of perfectionism and things never being good enough. And I just have a real tendency in my writing to just pick at something. And it never quite feels ready or done. And so, yeah, I still feel that all the time. I think for me, it tends to be in that notion of like how to make a novel better. I think the good news is like I'm on what I think I'm knocking on all sorts of wood right now is like really the final draft of this novel that I've been working on for a while. And in fact, I had hired a developmental editor, Lonnie Diane Rich, who's part of the NaNoWriMo world at one of our very first like published NaNoWriMo success stories. And she gave me incredible feedback that kind of helped me see new possibilities in this book. And so I got her feedback about a year ago, and I've been like going through and re-architecting and finishing up this draft. But yeah, at each step of this revision process, I've just been like, this is dumb. You will never finish this. This is an embarrassment. Nobody will want to read this. Like that's my ongoing chat. So yeah, I still feel it. It's
amazing. It's amazing. Happens to me too, in very much the same way. Cameron McCrory asks, what's your most favorite thing to happen in your 24 years of doing NaNoWriMo?
Oh my gosh. Oh, there have been like so many wonderful moments. I mean, I think that so there's one that is just about that sense of output and things being finished. And so I think just in general now, like when I go to an airport, I wander through the airport bookstore, and invariably I very quickly see there's a NaNoWriMo novel on the shelf. And when I go to libraries now, like there are NaNoWriMo novels out in the world. And I think that feels amazing to know that I think there are people that started again with this like delightfully imperfect first draft that they wrote in November, and then they stuck with it and they revised it, and they've so many different iterations and drafts and improvements, and then it found a home out there in the world and the bookshelves. That feels good. I think also I will say that going to schools, especially the Young Writers Program schools, those are really my favorite moments. I remember going to a school in Berkeley, an elementary school, where the 4th and 5th graders both do National Novel Writing Month. And I remember going to visit the school and meet with these 4th and 5th graders, and they had all these banners up where they would kind of post their word counts. And the 4th and 5th grade were locked in this like battle to the death on who was going to get the most writing done most quickly. And I remember talking to the teachers there, and one of them looking at me and just saying, they're staying in from recess to work on their novels. And for the teachers, there was this sense of like, what is happening? And I think of that idea of like kids discovering that magic of storytelling and writing. I think those are really like my favorite moments. And now I think that I run into a lot of people, so there's a undergrad class, a NaNoWriMo class at Stanford run by my friends Tom and Scott. And I go and visit that class every year. And one, that's amazing that like Stanford has this long running writing month class. But two, it's like there are people in that class that they're working on their like 5th novel. And it's because they started doing the Young Writers Program in middle school. And that's normal, that's that sense of possibility. And I do think that when you are an elementary school student and you see writing as like scary or boring or overwhelming, and then suddenly you bash out that first book and you're like, whoa, I think that changes your relationship to words and writing. And I think that change lasts the rest of your life. And so I think just there's a contact high that comes from being around those kids that are like working on their like the monkey vampire novels. It's like all this, their stories are so good. And I think those probably are like some of my favorite NaNoWriMo moments, just being around those kids.
It's so amazing because I obviously didn't have the Young Writers Program growing up or nothing remotely like it. And I, just like you, I talked to so many teens and they're not writing their first short story or their first poem or their first novel. They've like got 6 or 7 novels under their butt, under the belt. And I actually had one conversation with one person who was like, just frustrated and felt like doomed because she hadn't published one of her novels yet as a 17-year-old. And I was like, you've got time, keep doing it. And I do want to say too, though, because like you, I'm super happy to see like the NaNoWriMo success stories in places like bookstores, but I'm actually as much or more touched by the people who show up just to write with their friends, because I think like what you're saying about what we start to lose as adults, we lose that kind of just like that storytelling for the sake of storytelling is important, is worthwhile.
Yeah. Well, I think also just the connections that come, the friendships that are made, the romances that bloom too. Like, I still will occasionally get like a picture in the mail of a kid in a stroller, and it's two adults that met, through National Novel Writing Month that, now have a family together. And I think that's amazing. And I do think like there are so many of us like nerdy book fans out there, and it's nice to have this community of people who also just love to nerd out over writing and reading and, want to talk about this stuff that I think sometimes can be kind of boring to the people around us.
Well, maybe on that note, Anne Lalonde has a question that maybe touches on that. She said, Chris, any advice for not feeling self-indulgent when you're writing and rewriting a novel that will never be published? So I don't know if this is a novel that she doesn't think is worthy of being published or. Yeah.
I mean, I think, like you said, like just the joy of creation is something that I find is like a sustaining part of life. And so I know the days, for some people, it's like the days when they don't work out, they don't feel as good. I think for me, the days when I don't have a chance to at least touch this kind of fictional world a little bit, feel a little bit more gray. And so I think that's the greatest form of self-indulgence, to know that this book is never going to be published and you're working on it. I think we all should have these projects, right, that are like that. And I think in some ways the like capitalist machine has kind of tainted our view of like what it means to make art. And I think, novels are one of the most beautiful art forms out there, but there should be a room for us to just make these things that are going to give us pleasure. And maybe we share it with family, and that's all it needs to be. I think in the same way that, we go and we play tennis or, we go running or whatever, it's like, we do that. It's a gift for ourselves, right? To help ourselves feel centered, to help challenge ourselves, to help push ourselves. And it doesn't necessarily need to result in this idea of like, I got a New York literary agent and that agent is now selling this book. I think it's incredibly powerful to have this thing that is a small wonder, that is an intimate joy. Like, oh, that's really great. So I'd say keep that self-indulgence going. I
like that.
Great. Yeah.
Good self-indulgence. It's like I always joke, there is something about writing that a lot of people like don't think it's worthwhile unless you have these professional goals, unless it's like you said, gets entered into the capitalist machine.
Yeah.
But when I think of something like knitting, I don't think they ask knitters like when they're going to open up their knitting store, or when they're going to go like public with the sweater they're knitting and sell it. It's like an activity that's like nourishing unto itself, which I think like writing can be too. So Rachel Berg says, is there a nano year you found most successful for writing? And was there anything different or new you found that you did that year that helped?
Yeah.
We all have up and down NaNoWriMo years, right? If we do it every year.
It's such a great question. I think for me, it has been so haphazard. I wish that there was some system of like, now I know what I'm doing, and from here on, it will all be good. But I think it's all just this weird, kind of intersection of my mental states, whatever random idea I happened to come up with 2 weeks before the event started. I think for me, that first year was just a great one. And if that first year had not been a great one, I don't think we would be sitting here, because I think I would have really been like, whoa, okay, that was, I thought it was going to be bad, and it was bad, and I didn't have a good time at all. But I think that first one was wonderful. I think like the fifth one was probably good. I think also learning kind of like what I love in books, in what I want to, the tone, like I just love kind of dark comedy, that kind of absurdist humor. And I love that National Novel Writing Month gives us a chance to experiment with different tones and different story types and different genres every year. Like, I think that's a really valuable thing. It's like a self-run course that every year we get to try something new. But I think over time I have learned like kind of, there's just certain things that I gravitate towards, and it's okay to let myself do those. So I think those ones where I've kind of like leaned into humor and leaned into kind of that, I think a little bit of that, it's usually kind of more of a modern tale with a lot of comedy in it. Those have gone better than the ones where I've been like, I will write the Nobel Prize winning novel this year. It is an intergenerational tale that will live for all time. And I'm like, oh, yeah. So, yeah.
I like that. Well, the famous Sushi Must Write asks, how do you think NaNoWriMo would be different if it began today? Or would it be different?
It's such a great question, Sushi. Hi, I love that question. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting to think about this. This is like a golden age of connectedness, right? And so some ways it was an uphill battle to like get the word out and to start to build those networks, pre-Twitter, pre-Facebook. The idea of texting things, like, that just didn't happen, right? I mean, if you had a phone that you could text on, it was going to take you 17 years to do that flip phone texting. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it would grow even faster now. I think there are a lot more connected communities. It's a great question. I'll have to think about that. I don't think I have a great answer. Grant, what do you think? I
don't know that I have a great answer either, because I think some things like really take off because of the time period where they started, and, like I've talked to people who are self-published authors, and they published in 2010, which was like a more wide open arena for indie authors, and they've told me they couldn't replicate their success like now, because it's just so much more crowded.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. Each era offers different possibilities, and NaNoWriMo was born kind of at the perfect moment in a way, like just with the rise of the internet. It's just so fascinating to think about where we were in 1999, because I think I had a flip phone, and I barely texted with it. It was pre-iPhone. It was pre-iPhone, right?
Well before iPhone.
Pre-social media.
Yeah, I don't think you had a flip phone, Grant. Yeah, I mean, I think also there was really a different sense of like, I think there were no classes, like a novel writing class, I think at the like university level, really you would do an outline in the first few chapters. And that was all that was seen as like possible. And so I think it's also been really wonderful to see that notion of like this anything goes first draft being baked into college curriculum. And there was really a lot of tension around it though. I remember like the LA Times editorial board in their newspaper said, NaNoWriMo was making a mockery of literature. And then the New York Times editorial board had to respond saying, no, this is a good thing. And I think at this point now, there isn't that sense that, oh, this is destroying our culture. I think people are like, oh, this is just a way for people to engage in this beautiful art form. And some people will go on to publish. Some people don't care about that. And that there's room for all of these approaches that kind of help us spend time in these beautiful, weird universes that live in our heads.
I love that as a definition of NaNoWriMo and one of its great benefits. Well, you know what? I know you've got a hard stop at 3, and so I'm going to finish with Catherine Graham's question. And she asks, what keeps you motivated to participate every year after doing this for 24 straight years? And maybe within that answer, you can give like the one tip you want to give people, the one bit of advice.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just love that sense of discovery, of not being sure what comes next and being able to kind of open that door to the imagination. I just think like so many people, my life is filled with obligations, and, it's family obligations, it's work obligations. And this is, I think, a chance to like embrace that very childlike sense of wonder and not knowing. And I don't know, I love it. I look forward to it. I think just on a creative level, something always comes of it that wouldn't have come otherwise. And so I think it's that sense of like opening that door and walking through it, and not knowing what you're going to find, but knowing you will find something worthwhile. So
yeah, it all ties back to no plot, no problem.
But I think also this tip that I would just really help people know is that you will have these ups and downs, right? We didn't talk about week 2 or the muddy middle, but just know that you're supposed to feel that, right? The professional authors, the most experienced professional authors, lose hope at times. And really the key is just to keep going. It will get better. You will lose your way. You will find your way again. And at the end of it all, you will look back and wonder at this great thing that you created.
That's perfect. Right for the sense of discovery, and just keep going, get through that muddy middle. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. I know I would love to talk about a bunch of other stuff, but thank you so much. That every time I hear these stories, they inspire me. So
absolutely.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Grant. Good luck to everybody doing National Novel Writing Month this year. Again, also thank you to all of our donors, our volunteers, the staff board. You are incredible, incredible human beings. Could not do this without you. And I'm just so proud to see this continuing to live on and have a positive impact in the world.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, everybody. Happy writing. Thanks for coming to the webcast.